Hello everyone, this is Ed Runkle, pastor at Tapestry Church, seen here weekly on LCTV channel 66, and you may see us live every Sunday morning at 10:30 at 22 Crady Avenue. Good morning everybody, welcome to Tapestry Church. I'm so glad you're here. It wasn't long ago that we celebrated what has become a big national holiday here in the United States, the Super Bowl, and it was interesting. Around that time I saw some studies that had been done that many folks, I think 1 in 4 it was, believe that God intervenes in the outcomes of things like football games. And 53% agree that God rewards athletes who have faith with good health and success. I mean, some of us have some interesting ideas about God, don't we? Well, according to Jesus' teaching, some of the same could be said when it comes to money. We're going to look at a teaching today from Matthew's Gospel in chapter 6, and I think I have verses 19 through 24, where Jesus speaks about treasure. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body, so if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or who will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. See, it's not that money is bad, it's what we believe about money that gets us into trouble. It's when we treasure it, to use the language of Jesus, that it gets us in trouble. It's the way we count on it and the way we cling to it and attach our hope to it. It's the way it sparks our imagination, but by what it will provide and the life it will bring. I mean, let me ask you this. A guy named Andy Stanley poses this question, and regardless of how you feel about your financial life, regardless of how much or how little you have in terms of resources, here's the question. How much money would you say you need in order to secure your future? So you're safe and protected, and not just you, but your family. How much money would you need? You know what? I bet I can answer this question for you, because in one way or another, your answer would be more than you have right now. Am I right? I mean, it's always more than I have right now. And the question is, why do you think that is so? Well, it might be that because the more you have, the more you can imagine you'll reach this point where you can build this kind of unscalable wall, where you can have a life that's impervious to troubles and to setbacks, an unscalable wall where everything feels secure and there are no more what-ifs. You know what? No one ever gets there. There is no unscalable wall. I mean, Jesus once told a parable about this, about a farmer who had a large harvest, and instead of seeing it as more than enough, he saw it as not enough. I mean, you can look this up in the New Testament book of Luke. In chapter 12, the guy builds bigger and bigger barns to store the crops for himself, which in its own way, or which is its own hell in a way, where you live as though, regardless of how much there is, it's not enough. Never enough money, never enough tension, never enough love, never enough time, never enough social life, never enough of what's valuable. And so you have to grasp at what's yours. And this is such a source of worry in life. I mean, worry is pretty much all about this feeling or this mindset of scarcity. I don't know about you, but I've never once worried that I would have more money than I need next month. What will I do with it all? Or, I've never once worried about I might be happy and healthy and live a long life. Dear me. But, we come by this kind of fear, honestly, in our society, in which a perceived state of scarcity is what kind of drives the free market economy. Or think about it like this. Do you know someone you would say is selfish? I mean, most often, selfish people are insecure, fearful, filled with doubt. The selfishness springs from this belief that this is my only good idea, my last dollar, my one and only chance to avoid failure. And they rationalize their selfishness or their ungenerosity by convincing themselves that the world is a place of scarcity. Their clutching is actually justified by what a wretched world this is. I need this, not you. Because, they truly believe they have nothing else going on, no other chance, no other hope. But see, here's the thing, the rub. As long as money is the chief source of my security, guess what is going to be the chief source of my anxiety? Money. It's just that way. I mean, can you say, holy shift? Now, our problem with money isn't just what we believe about money. It's also about what we believe about God, isn't it? It's what you actually believe about God, regardless of what you tell yourself you believe about God. It's what you actually believe. It's that maybe deep down, where you wouldn't want to admit it, you don't believe that God cares. Or maybe deep down, and you wouldn't want to admit it, you don't believe He's reliable when it comes to the practical things of life. Now, I'm not saying that trusting God is easy or simple, but just because trusting God may feel risky, it doesn't mean that there's any other better long-term option, because there isn't. He died for you. Would He not want to provide for you? I mean, I think we want to have it both ways. We want to store up treasures on earth because that's where we find our value and security, and at the same time, we want treasures in heaven, right? I mean, if you're like me, you go about your life like you can choose both the kingdom's values and the world's values. I'll think, okay, God, I'll choose you at church. I'll choose you in certain spiritual things, when I pray or that sort of thing. But when it comes down to how I pay my bills or how I plan for my future or how I hold on to my money or how I act generously in the world, well, I have my own ideas about that. To me, it all seems just to be a little too Eddie Haskell-ish. You know what I mean? Some of you know about Eddie Haskell, right? You sure look lovely today, Mrs. Cleaver. And then just after, charming the Beaver's mom, Eddie Haskell's off stealing some kid's lunch money. I mean, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but you get the point. And we do this with God. We say stuff in worship and in the songs we sing about how, awesome God is and how good God is and how faithful God is and what a provider. And then just after saying these things, we make decisions or take actions that show that we actually put our hope in our stuff. But Jesus says there's a problem with stuff. Stuff is temporary. Stuff can't be counted on. And let me ask you this. What do you think would be the most famous archaeological relic of the world? Well, until they find the ark in some, government warehouse, most of us would probably say that it's King Tut's burial mass. Well, did you see this in the news not so long ago? It was, heartbreaking to hear that King Tut's braided beard was broken recently, broken loose. And maybe you saw this. Surely they restored it perfectly, right? Well, if you count using irreversible epoxy, which left a gap of yellow glue as perfect, well then, yes. And surely it's not a big deal that the epoxy spilled onto the face and was removed with a spatula that left scratches, right? And here's what I'm trying to say. I mean, it would be so good if in so many areas of our lives, but especially when it comes to our treasures, to our stuff, houses, clothes, cars, money, if we just had these giant stickers that said temporary, 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 because our hearts get all wrapped up in this stuff. I mean, talk about a holy shift. Why would we get all wrapped up in stuff that's just temporary? You know, I once heard it put like this: nobody rents a room at Motel 6 for a couple of nights and pays to have it redecorated in a really expensive way. Or nobody rents a car for a day and takes it and pays to have it detailed because it's just temporary. It's just for the moment. And so are our lives and our possessions in the light of eternity. Or think about it like this. I mean, yeah, money can do some things. You know, it can give you more choices, make life more convenient, maybe open some doors, can bring a certain feeling and, you know, sparks of experiences or pleasures or satisfaction that you think will last. But, and this is huge, it's just the provision and not the provider. And so it's deeply limited. And when you think about what's most important in life and what money can and cannot do, I mean, it's significant. Money cannot fix a relationship or a marriage that's on the rocks. It cannot change the heart of a loved one or a child who is turned against you. It cannot heal you from addiction or loneliness or despair. It's deeply limited. Now, when Jesus says, you know, don't store up treasures for yourself on earth, does that mean that making provisions for the future or future need is wrong? Well, no. The problem is that Jesus wants us to avoid putting our hope in these things, in our bank account, in our things, rather than in God. Putting our hope in the provision rather than in the provider. That's the problem. I mean, it would seem that there would be no contest in the choice between worshiping the giver of all things and the false idolatry of worshiping the things, but things get, you know, they have tremendous power over us. And we can turn them into a means of security. And when we do, there's a problem. I mean, just if you look at the verse just beyond what we read earlier, it begins with the word therefore. Verse 20 says, you cannot serve God and money. Verse 25 begins, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life. In other words, if you're serving money and only ever investing in earthly treasures, then you'll be inclined to worry about the material things, about what to eat, drink, and wear. Money can have power over us, can become a master when we put our hope in it rather than in God. And to do so just leads to all kinds of dysfunctional living. I mean, think about it just in terms of debt for a moment. And let me kind of set this up, because here's how we tend to operate. We want to let the obviously broken people carry all the brokenness for us. It's quite a convenient system, really. Like when someone is obviously an active alcoholic, we're thrilled not to have to look at our own drinking. This system we have where we all agree on who the real drunk is or who the real liar is or who the one who is obviously up to their neck in debt is, that really works well for us. But the truth is, it doesn't. You know, we've all been sold very hard on the equation, acquisition equals happiness. And consumer debt is the engine that permits this. That is, until it doesn't. I mean, debt is so ingrained into our culture that most of us can't imagine a car without a payment, a house without a mortgage, a student without a loan. Debt is sold with such repetition that most of us can't comprehend a life without payments. In fact, USA Today had an article about this not long ago, where credit card companies send out 4 billion solicitations every year, the equivalent of 16 letters to every man, woman, and child in the United States. If you can breathe, you got one of these. You hear from these credit card companies more than you hear from those in your own family. But let me ask you this. What do you think is the root of debt? And let's just say consumer debt. We'll leave mortgage debt out of this. What do you think is at the root? It's wanting more than what God has provided for my life, wanting more than has come my way, and finding another way of kind of forcing it, making it happen. That's where debt comes in. Debt very often is simply saying, in effect, hey, God, I think you've messed up on the provision level of my life. I think it actually needs to be up here. And so, I'm going to find a way of doing that. I think you got your wires crossed. I don't trust this level of provision. So, I'm going to go into debt to create a new provision line for my life. And, and then we, justify our going into debt by telling ourselves, I know God wants me to be happy. And if I'm going to be happy, I have to have this provision level. And that's not what's coming in right now, so I'll find a way to do it. And, in this world, that's kind of easy. But see, debt makes people live with a constant sense of financial pressure and bondage. This is all over the Bible. From the book of Proverbs, we're told that the rich rule over the poor, the borrower is a slave to the lender. It's a form of slavery. And what comes next is shame. People, who've been honest their whole lives find themselves telling lies. People who've always paid their bills on time, have been straightforward in business dealings, start to break commitments and betray trust. They don't want to do that, but they do it. People who would otherwise be quite courageous end up living in fear of getting found out. And so they start evading and hyping and spinning, and relational trust gets broken down, and things just go downhill from there. Did any of you see that the German courts, a court has said that men in that country have the right to pee standing up? Maybe you didn't know that was an issue, but it's a big deal over there, big time. The Atlantic explains the dispute in Dusseldorf is actually part of a long-running debate in Germany over whether men should be encouraged to sit when urinating. And the controversy pits, and I'm no German speaker, but it's Stehpinklers, men who stand up to pee, against Sitzpinklers, men who sit down. And it's, there have been some bizarre twists over the years. And in 2004, for example, the Telegraph reported that Sitzpinkler had become a synonym for wimp, and that a company had invented some gadget that attached to toilets to kind of shame and scold Stehpinklers when they lifted the seat. Well, here's what I'm trying to get at. There is no shame here. There's no guilt here. At the cross, Jesus died to free us from shame and guilt and sin, and that includes the financial area of life. And He'll do that for you. You can, if you want, put a stake in the ground on this and declare, I'm done. I'm done with debt. I'm going to cut up my credit cards if I need to, get counsel from a financial advisor, live within my means, get a plan. I'm not going to live in financial bondage anymore. I'll learn to live gratefully within the provision God has given my life. Holy shift. And so, how do we do that? How do we make sure we're choosing God over money? How can we make sure money is our servant and not our master? Well, we begin to break free from our slavery to money and things by treasuring Jesus and by being generous with money and things. By treasuring Jesus, who is willing to pay the ultimate price so that we may be His ultimate treasure. Holy shift. Conventional wisdom about money kind of takes the opposite approach. Make as much as you can, keep as much as you can, because the more you give, the less you have. The less you give, the more you have. If you give nothing, then you have the maximum amount you could. If you have $10 and you give 1, 10 minus 1 is 9. But if you have 10 and you give nothing, 10 minus 0 equals 10. 10 is more than 9. Is everybody following me so far? This is pretty deep. But what I'm trying to get at is that conventional wisdom it's just math. Keeping is the better strategy than giving. It's just math. There's a Syracuse professor who writes about how scores of millions of Americans never give anything, any charity, nothing at all. When asked, why don't you give, the number one answer by far is, I can't afford to, I don't have enough. The corollary for that very often is, of course, at heart, I'm a generous person, I would give more if I could just afford to. But here's what happens in life. This will happen to you, it will happen to me. If I just approach my money by saying, what are my expenses? I'll take care of those first. What will happen is my life will fill up with expenses. The more money I get, the more expenses I'll get. See, part of our problem with generosity, it can be traced back to the Old Testament in the book of Genesis. We see that long before humanity appears, the scene is built around God. In the beginning, God. And God gives humanity life and breath to live joyfully under His rule. As their Creator, rightfully their lives are His. But our first parents rebelled and said, no, these lives are ours. And sin entered into the world. And for millennia, we've dealt again and again with the devastating consequences of thinking, this life is mine. Part of what it means to choose God over money is to see the world and everything in it that it belongs to God, and that every good thing that I've received has been given for the good of me, but also for the good of my neighbor and the world God loves. Holy shift. It's to recognize that no part of my life as a Christian is mine. It's to recognize that all should be done as an act of worship. It's in effect to write redeemed over every dollar, every financial decision, and ask, how does God want me to use His money, His resources? And see, people who excel in the grace of giving, to use the language of the Apostle Paul, give because they've decided to give. People who don't usually give didn't decide to not give, they just didn't decide to give. And so they live in this kind of fog. Think about it. When you get to the end of your life, how will you have handled all that God has entrusted to your care? Because He's entrusted significant resources to our care. Have any of you seen the movie Moneyball? It's worth seeing. It's a great movie about Major League Baseball and in particular a team, the Oakland A's, Oakland Athletics. At the end of the movie, Peter Brand, one of the real-life characters played by Jonah Hill, sits down with Billy Beane, the primary real-life character played by Brad Pitt, and they have this important conversation. They've had this incredible season, but Billy still doesn't believe in himself, doesn't believe he's done anything good. And so Peter sits him down, shows him a video of a heavy-set minor league baseball player who's always been afraid to round first base. He was a pretty good hitter, but rarely hit a double because he was too slow. And one day, he decides to go for it. He's going to try to hit a double. He hits the ball squarely, puts his head down, plows toward first base, and then disaster. He trips on the first base bag. Peter Brand pauses the image, and Billy Beane laughs. Poor guy. Billy says, everybody's laughing at him. Peter hits play again. Yeah, Peter said, but they're not laughing because he fell down. And the video reveals that the player, is crawling back toward first base, trying not to get thrown out. But the first baseman helps him up, points toward the outfield. The player had hit a home run. He'd cleared the fence by 60 feet. There's some silence in the room as the player went on to round the bases. It's a metaphor, Peter says. You hit a home run and don't know it. We're kind of like Billy Beane. Not that we've hit a home run and don't know it, but that we've hit the jackpot and don't know it. Talk about holy shift. Think about Jesus, God's own Son, all-knowing, all-powerful, had all the resources of the universe at His disposal, but what did He do? He came into the world in the form of a man, was generous with His time, shared what He had. He was never in it for just Himself, and then He gave up everything, His life, gave it up, all of it, for you and for me. I mean, do you see it? Because God, the provider, has been infinitely generous with us in every way, but especially in Christ, we can, no matter what our financial circumstances, be joyfully generous. And in a way that makes our neighbors, our friends, the people in our lives scratch their heads and say, who are these people? What is this? May that be so of you and of me. Thank you for joining us at Tapestry Church this morning. We hope you enjoyed the message. For more information, you may check out our website or Facebook page, and you may see us live weekly at 22 Crady Avenue at 10:30. All are welcome.